my understanding from sources in America is that they have tracked Epstein's activities and operations back to the 1970s, as far back as that. And I think in all the sort of furore of the sensationalist coverage of this and the photos and everything that are appearing on the front page of the newspapers, we've got to see the bigger picture. And my understanding from my American sources is that as early as the 1970s, Epstein was effectively involved with Russian organized crime in Brighton Beach in New York, and through them with the Russian mission in New York.
Among the Epstein files are more than 1,000 documents that name Vladimir Putin and more than 9,000 that refer to Moscow. They suggest that Epstein was granted audiences with the Russian president even after the American financier was convicted in 2008 of procuring a child for prostitution. There are also quite a few references to Russian women in the files. Some wonder if all of this is linked. Could Epstein, for example, have been running a compromat operation on behalf of Moscow, luring influential figures into sexual encounters with the women and recording those encounters for blackmail? Well, Christopher Steele is the former head of MI6's Russia desk and was the author of the Steele dossier into Russian interference in the 2016 US presidential election. Good morning.
Good morning, Kate.
We should start with that suggestion that, there could be some link between Jeffrey Epstein and Russia in terms of a compromat operation. How realistic is that in your view?
I think it's very likely. The one organisation in the world that knows most about this is the FBI. And my understanding from sources in America is that they have tracked Epstein's activities and operations back to the 1970s, as far back as that. And I think in all the sort of furore of the sensationalist coverage of this and the photos and everything that are appearing on the front page of the newspapers, we've got to see the bigger picture. And my understanding from my American sources is that as early as the 1970s, Epstein was effectively involved with Russian organized crime in Brighton Beach in New York, and through them with the Russian mission in New York, and was almost certainly recruited by them at that time. Moving on to a later period involving probably Robert Maxwell in the 1980s, it seems to me again that Epstein had significant ties to Maxwell. And when Maxwell was involved in getting Jewish people out of the Soviet Union, in return, effectively, for laundering Soviet Communist Party hard currency and investing it in the West, I suspect that's where quite a lot of Epstein's investment money came from.
And what would have been the benefit to Epstein? It would have been entirely financial?
Yes, effectively, it could have been a number of things. They could have put pressure on him by knowing things about him. But I certainly think that he benefited financially from the latter operation, as I've just described it. And possibly the majority of his investment funds, which seem to never have been explained, actually came from the Soviet Union.
Is there any proof of that? Is there any hard evidence of that kind of link financially?
My understanding is the Americans have this sort of evidence. It hasn't been made public. And I suspect that as we go through this story, as it's going to unfold over time, that will become clearer.
And what would Russia have wanted from this kind of operation?
Well, initially, as I say, Russia would have wanted to invest money clandestinely in the West as the Soviet Union was crumbling and collapsing. But I think probably what they did is that they then realized that Epstein was a good networker, was very charming and convincing, and was able to effectively act as you say, as a compromat agent effectively in America and elsewhere in his relationships with important and powerful people.
Can I ask you a slightly tangential question, which is one that's come up a few times in our interviews this morning, relating to Peter Mandelson? Some people say, why was better vetting not done? Why were our intelligence services not able to work out that there could have been this potential risky link? And you're saying, that these links with Epstein may well have been fairly, well known, commonly known by security services. Would that have been something that should have or would have been flagged with politicians?
Yes, obviously some of this dates back to my time in government, so it's difficult to talk about. But my view is that some of this information certainly would have been available to the British government and to others over time, given how close our liaison relationships were with the FBI and American intelligence. And as I say, they seem to know the most about this operation and coverage of, indeed, both Epstein and Prince Andrew.
So there is a suggestion, you're suggesting there that information about Peter Mandelson's links may well have been flagged, because at the moment we are told that the government did investigate in September, most recently. We don't know what vetting was done and how deep that went prior to that there would have been information available to find.
Well, presumably the American Department of Justice that's released all these files held this information at that time. So, when Mandelson was being vetted for the ambassador in Washington, this information should have been shared by the American government with our security services. I don't know whether it was, but it certainly should have been.
Well, it's a very, very interesting point to make there. Christopher Steele, the former head of MI6's Russian desk, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Really striking thing, likely that Epstein was recruited by the Russians in the 70s. And therefore, all these evidence, all of this material you see, these photographs, these compromising images, how much of Russia were Russia either behind that or benefiting from it is a question that may come out, is what Christopher Steele seems to be saying, that may come out if the Americans choose to push at that.
I think for me, this is one of the threads that we need to pull at, which is, and I think for a lot of people listening to this, it is one of their biggest concerns. It's the idea that people did know, but they pretended not to know. And when I say people, I mean politicians and those in the security services, those in positions of significant power in this country, that in some way there is almost a shadow environment where, your transgressions or your missteps or your business associations that are not savoury are known about and either dismissed or put in a box, and you are still allowed to operate in the public environment. I think that's a lot of people's concern about this kind of story, that, well, who knew what when? And we are trying to pull that out with the ministers that we speak to and the people who are in office now. And to be fair to them, they were not in government or in office at the time. And how much were they given access to? How much did they ask? How much did they want to know? And how much would have been provided to them? I think those are some of the biggest questions outstanding for me.
We've got Kezia Dugdale and Michael Gove on in about 15 minutes' time. We have some experience of politics at the high level. We'll ask them that question as well.